Welcome to another Kundalini After Dark session. I'm your host, Brent Spirit, and I'm live on Zoom, live on YouTube, live on Instagram with over 30 people joining us tonight. Thank you all so much for joining tonight. If you're listening in the archive, thanks so much for tuning in. You can join the next live Kundalini After Dark meeting. You can visit brentspirit.com/afterdark to register. We'd love to have you. Today's topic is Kundalini and integrating identity shifts. So we'll unpack this today. I'll share some of my thoughts, a little bit about my experience with this theme, and then I'm going to open the floor up for others to share about their experiences with some of the challenges and also the successes that come with this idea of our identity or our identities shifting, transforming, morphing, dying, falling away, maybe new identities emerging as we go through this transformative process known as Kundalini awakening. So I'll invite others to share on that theme, but other themes are, of course, welcome here as well. If you have anything else on your mind that you'd like to share about related to Kundalini awakening, related to spiritual emergence, maybe you've got some questions for myself or the group, I'll do my best to answer, but I'm going to open the floor for others to share about, their wisdom and their experience as well. Maybe something interesting has happened to you recently that you'd like to share and be heard about within a community of others who are going through the same sort of thing as you. This is the place. We'll see how things go. This is Kundalini After Dark, sort of like a Kundalini party, Kundalini open mic, something like that. Let's see how it goes. So if you're listening in the archive and you haven't already, you can hit follow on Spotify. You can leave a rating for the show. That goes a long way for me as well. I really appreciate all of your support, all of your donations and engagement, likes, shares, comments, all of that really, really helps me a lot. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. So let's talk now about Kundalini and integrating identity shifts. So on the most fundamental level, we go through this pretty significant identity shift, which is out of this idea of being a separate individual in the world to one that is one with all, interconnected, right? The idea of separation falls away. And with that, the idea of a separate sense of self begins to fall away. So that's the most fundamental, you could say, core component of our identity, right? We call it the ego, call it that separate sense of self. So as we go through Kundalini awakening, typically when the Kundalini makes her way up the spinal column, she makes her way to the head and brings about this experience of oneness, right? Non-duality, not two-ness, right? Move out of separation. So that's the most fundamental shift that we can experience, and it can bring great insight. It can be very liberating, very freeing, right? You can feel like you can finally breathe in a new sense, almost as if you were suffocating in the sense of separation all of this time. That's what it felt like for me when I first experienced this shift out of separation. Many different positive, beneficial shifts come with that. But also there can be significant turbulence, right? Because this is so fundamental to who we are. And even though we may have shifted out of separation, right? May have shifted out of the separate sense of self, out of the ego, we can still have major troubling questions like, what do I do now? What motivates me now? What am I here to do? How do I operate? How do I relate with other people? So those things can come up. If you look at the Buddhist paradigm, this is the idea of anatta, no self, right? One of the four stages of enlightenment within the Buddhist paradigm, stream entry, sotapanna, right? So an individual realizes this, idea, or not really an idea, fundamental truth that there is no separate individual sense of self, right? No self. And working to integrate that, of course, has to do with the latter stages of enlightenment on the path. But with the Kundalini process as well, we can come to experience this. And some will actually experience this very early on in their process rather than as a culminating point in the process. So some experience this as a sort of a consequence of having a top-down Kundalini awakening in which energy or expansion of consciousness occurs primarily in the head first, and then later on it makes its way deeper into the body, deeper into the nervous system. Whereas other people, they'll have a sort of a rising from the bottom up, and progressively they'll begin to experience this idea of, the sense of self falling away, separation falling away. So this is the most fundamental identity shift that we can experience, like I've repeated too many times already. But beyond that, we can have more you could say, surface layer identity shifts that takes place. And those can also be quite uncomfortable and destabilizing, having to do with shifts in our interests, our motivations, our beliefs, our paradigms, our association with religion. Sometimes we have shifts associated with past life memories. We start to wonder, well, who am I? I remember my entire previous incarnation. Now, what the heck does that have to do with who I am in this life? All of these types of things can occur as well, and they can be quite challenging. So we're going to unpack this a little bit today. I'll give you some ideas, talk a little bit about my experience, and like I said, I'll open the floor for others to share as well. Right. So when and if we experience this, falling away of separation, we can feel quite unstable, almost as if we don't have anything to stand on, right? Almost as if we go from being solid to somehow being more like a vapor, that sort of thing. It can be quite unusual, quite uncomfortable. The identity can fall away, and with that identity falling away, resistance to a high degree falls away as well. And as a result, all sorts of dormant, latent emotional content can begin to arise, and that can also be quite uncomfortable and pretty disturbing as well. And that can lead to, a significant purges. I've got a previous Kundalini After Dark talk in which we discuss surviving Kundalini purges, which you might want to check out. So with this shift in identity, as we go through spiritual awakening or Kundalini awakening, spiritual emergence, we come to understand some other fundamental truths about reality, right? The present moment is all there is, right? The future doesn't exist. So this can cause us to really get puzzled and confused when it comes to what motivates us in life, right? Because many people have been told by the culture, do X, Y, and Z today so you can find fulfillment tomorrow, right? Work hard so you can get a lot of money, you can buy a big house, and then you'll be fulfilled. But on a deep level, we realize as we go through this process, the present moment is all there is. Therefore, the future never comes. Therefore, no matter what you get in the future, you'll never be fulfilled. So then we can ask, well, what motivates me in life? Or we can look back at all of the work that we've put in trying to get fulfilled in the future. We could say, well, what do I do with all of this work that I started? Or how do I continue? How do I make sense of all of this? It can be very, very destabilizing for a person. And as a result, we can struggle to find new motivations, new forces to move us in life. This can be very uncomfortable as well. We can question whether, everything that we did until this point was just in vain, right? It can be very, very, very challenging. We can lose interest in things that previously were very important to us, interests, hobbies, passions. These things can fall away. And maybe we built up an entire identity, an entire community. Maybe we invested a lot of time and money into those things. And suddenly overnight, even, we just look around and we think, this is not for me anymore, right? That can be rather unusual and strange. New interests in things can emerge as well. Sometimes people develop powerful, inspired creativity. Sometimes people become very, very, you could say, obsessive with spirituality, obsessive in I would say a good way. I'm that way. All they want to do is read and study and meditate and have these types of conversations. This can happen as well. All sorts of shifts can happen like this. In general, our masks can begin to either fall off or be seen through. The roles that we play, the characters that we play, all of this can begin to be seen as not solid, not true, not real. And this can be kind of uncomfortable. And sometimes we see through it, but they remain, and that can be even more unusual, right? As well, as we go through this process, we heal, right? We heal. And the wounded parts of us, though they may be uncomfortable, though they may be a source of suffering, they can actually also be what bolsters up major parts of our identity, our purpose, our career, right? So when we heal, those aspects of ourselves and our lives no longer feel relevant. They no longer feel congruent or in alignment with who we are. So in some sense, in that way, if we heal, we can kind of cause our life to look like incongruent, right? Not matching up with who we are anymore. Though healing is good, it can put us in a predicament where we don't feel comfortable in that sense. This can happen We can also experience significant challenges in relationships, right? We go through these shifts. We have these profound experiences. We see things differently. We feel differently. We've healed. We've evolved, right? Sometimes we're in, you could say a toxic relationship because of our unhealed wounds. And when we heal those wounds, the toxic relationship no longer fits us. It's no longer serving us or meeting some of our unmet needs or whatever it may be, right? Maybe we're used to chaos and we heal and we no longer are inclined towards chaos. And so a toxic relationship no longer serves us and we find ourselves still in this relationship and unsure what to do. This can happen. Then of course we have the difficulty of having to try and explain what we're going through to other people, using these words like Kundalini and energy and spiritual awakening and all this type of stuff can be very difficult, right? Especially for those who haven't experienced it. Especially if we happen to be one of the people that become obsessed with this topic. We really want to talk about it. This can be very uncomfortable for people. They don't know what to do. Either they talk too much and alienate people, or they don't know what to do and they keep it to themselves and they feel like they're hiding, being dishonest, withholding, that sort of thing. All of that can be very uncomfortable. We can have, of course, challenges in our career as well, right? Whether we were in a career because it once served us for some way or another, whether we thought that career would fulfill us, these things can all fall away, and yet we still are in this sort of career, perhaps. That could be uncomfortable. All sorts of different uncomfortable things can come with these shifts in identity. Now, don't worry, I'm going to give you some ideas of how we can work with all of these changes. And like I said, I want to hear from others for how they may have, overcome some of these difficulties. We can have changes in our religious beliefs, our religious orientation. This can shift drastically. Perhaps we don't reject the religion we were brought up, but we become more open to other religions. We kind of see the perennial philosophy, the common thread that runs through them all. So this can be very confusing for us. It can also be confusing for other people who see us now incorporating, all sorts of different say different deities and different figures from different traditions on our altar or in our practices and whatever it may be. So that could be challenging. That can also alienate us from our community, especially if our community is a religious community, which many people, that is their primary community. That's their safe space. That's what they're familiar with. That's what they grew up with. Now they go through these changes overnight. It can be pretty challenging. For those who may be inclined towards atheism, maybe they kind of established some sort of philosophy or established a comfortable life accepting things as an atheist. And then overnight, they have an experience that reveals that there's much more going on here than just the material world. And this can cause people to feel quite confused as well. So all of these different changes can arise. Now, I have to admit, I haven't experienced this degree of difficulty in the way that others have, mainly because I began to go through this process very young, very young. So I was just a teenager when this all began for me. So I didn't really have much of an established identity to fall apart. I didn't have much of anything, really. I was a teenager. I was just still trying to figure it out. So very early on, I was having anything that I did have completely blasted apart, right? And so ever since then, I've just been going along with this process, not really feeling as if anything was really solid in me. So I recognize that it's very different for somebody who maybe established a career, a family, maybe even a public role as a certain identity, and then to go through this process and have all of that seem incongruent, that can be very, very challenging. And so I can recognize the difficulty, but I haven't experienced that myself. I've had my own share of difficulty going through this very young. That was challenging in its own right. But on our topic today, I think others may have a lot more to say from personal experience than I can. But I can share some ideas here about how we can move through these difficult shifts in our identity that bring this sort of turbulence. And so the first idea I have here is that we have to honor the grief process. We have to mourn the loss of these identities. We have to mourn these changes, these deaths that we go through, right? So we have to honor the feelings that come up. Yeah, it's uncomfortable when a part of you dies and falls away, right? Maybe you were the person with a certain religious orientation or a certain belief, or you were the person that was drawn to a certain relational dynamic. Like I said, maybe it was chaos, and maybe it was, say, partying, and you liked that sort of thing, and it came with a whole lifestyle, and it was fun, right? But then we go through this process and we shift and we change, and we're no longer inclined to move to in those older directions, right? But we have to mourn, we have to grieve. So give yourself some time and some space to feel the feelings that come up, to recognize, yeah, that was a chapter in your life, or those are some chapters in your life that are changing. Maybe they're ending, maybe they're shifting. But we honor the feelings that come up rather than resisting them, right? We come to a point of acceptance eventually, accepting that, yeah, I have changed. Things have changed in my life. I didn't necessarily want them. I didn't ask for them. I wasn't working towards those changes, but that's what happened. We have to honor and accept those feelings, right? It's a death, right? This is a death, ego death, right? Death of the false self, the falling away of separation. All of this is like, death, right? We have to mourn. When there's a death, we mourn, right? Death and rebirth, right? There's a mourning that has to take place here. So this is the same sort of thing that, you may notice, say, like somebody that's suffering from addiction, and then they recover, right? Or they're in recovery. They not only have to process the feelings of being attracted to a particular substance, but they also have to process and grieve the lifestyle itself that they were associated with, that came with the sort of addiction. So this is all part of the process. So we have to acknowledge, this is a death, this is a change, this is a transformation. We have to grieve. We have to give ourselves space for these feelings. It's quite natural. I don't think we can really go through this without some degree of grief, right? Especially if we've established, our identity to a very high degree. If we've made it to, our middle age, like I said, maybe have a family, a career, all that sort of thing. So after we grieve, or during the grief process, it can kind of blend and blur, I'm sure. But afterwards, we work towards integration and embodiment. So what does this really mean? Well, put it this way, within the context of what we're speaking about here, if you have some uncomfortable feelings associated with your spiritual realizations or transformations or shifts, with your identity changes, with the false self falling away, if any of that feels uncomfortable, that's okay. However, the feeling of uncomfortableness, feeling of discomfort, means that something has not been integrated yet. And that's okay. No blame. You can't force integration. You can't rush it. It's just a sign, hey, the reason that this feels uncomfortable is because it's not integrated yet, right? So like I was speaking earlier, some people within, say, the Buddhist paradigm come to Sotapanna, all right, stream entry, right? They have this realization of no self. It brings a certain degree of peace and stuff, but there can still be a high degree of something is uncomfortable and off here, especially early on, because it still needs to be integrated, So even though it's a very profound shift, integration is necessary, and that's why there's some discomfort. So you can take note. If I'm feeling uncomfortable, there's something yet to be integrated. Okay, that's where you can focus your attention. So just like on the hero's journey, the hero goes from the known world, they leave the village, they enter out into the unknown world, right? They go on an adventure, they go through the death and rebirth process, and they don't instantly return back to the known world. They have to go through the journey back home to the village. And it's along that journey back home after the death and rebirth that then they're beginning the integration process. And finally, when they return back to the village, then they can say the integration process is complete and they're no longer feeling uncomfortable or raw, right? So there's a bit of an interim period between rebirth and return, and that's integration, okay? And it's, like I said, it's an uncomfortable part to be in on the journey. So embodiment, right? So I said integration and embodiment. What does embodiment mean? So it's in the word body, right? This body. So we have realization, shifts, transformations on the level of the mind, our concept of who we are, right? Our sense of self. These things will shift on the level of the mind, right? We can have instant realizations, instant shifts. We can have this in a flash, we can realize there's no self. In a flash, we can realize, the present moment is all there is. In a flash, we can realize, the unsatisfactory nature of this world and that nothing in the future will ever fulfill us. In a flash, we can realize this. However, the body, the nervous system, doesn't have insights happen in a flash. It takes time, right? So embodiment means bringing those realizations into this nervous system over time and allowing the body to catch up, right? So mind is you could say in a sense it's non-physical. Yeah, there's neurons and stuff firing in the brain, but in a sense it's non-physical. It's something that we can't really grasp, the mind, right? However, the body is physical and it's very dense. So mind, not so dense, body, very dense, right? Dense, energetically, you could say. So that's why it takes more time. That's why there's a bit of a lag. That's why there's a process of embodiment that happens over time, whereas you can have an instant realization on the level of the mind. You can't have an instant embodiment. It takes time. So what do we do then? Well, we have to live in this body and somehow, in our own unique way, try to make sense of our realizations as a human being with a body, right? So yeah, you may have realized the present moment all there is. You may have realized there's no self. You may have realized that you're here to do, great spiritual service. Okay, how do you embody all of that? It's through this nervous system. So in the nervous system, you have to find the vibration, the frequency of what it means to live in a state of total relaxation into the present moment without that separate sense of self leading. And it's a meditative state, and that takes some time. The body also here is, relatively speaking, stable and consistent, right? So our identity can shift very rapidly. The body is very stable and consistent. Yes, I completely understand impermanence. Even the body is constantly changing. However, if you look at a baby picture of yourself, maybe not a baby picture, but maybe when you were 5 years old, you can see the resemblance. It's still you. The body is still you, right? You could see a friend from 20 years ago, likely they'll be able to recognize you. It's still you. The body doesn't change that much. Identity can change. We can have these all sorts of shifts on the level of identity, at the level of the mind, personality, ego, for sure. But the body, relatively speaking, is the same, right? DNA, same, right? You take your blood, DNA, whatever, saliva from today or 50 years ago, it'll be the same. They'll be able to match it, right? So the body doesn't change so much. So this is where we can find stability. Our identity will shift as we go through this process very rapidly. Sometimes even within one day, you can have all sorts of changes happen. But the body, it's dense, it's quite stable. So that's where we can find some stability in the body and the nervous system. Okay. Also having patience with this process of integration, right? Having patience returning, understanding that this death and rebirth process that we're going through, multiple deaths and rebirths, takes time. It's intense, right? We can't rush it. So have to give it some, you have to be a little bit gentle with it, right? And then in the midst of that, the body is stable, relatively speaking, but then there's also a part of us that's also stable, which we could say is consciousness, is awareness, the part of us that's beyond birth and death. So we can also find that place and rest there, right? And rest there. And when we're resting there, we can notice everything is going to come and go and change and shift and morph, and that's okay. If we rest in the eternal within, the part of us that's like I said, beyond birth and death, right? Beyond the beyond, that part. If we rest there, we can find peace. But even that takes some time. Following that type of integration, often with these shifts in identity, for practically all of us would be called towards some form of service. No, I don't mean necessarily writing a book or something like that, though it could be for sure. For some, it's just some sort of orientation towards service, which means I've recognized that I'm not just a separate individual here. I'm connected to all that is, to everyone. So therefore, I'm here to serve because it's all me, right? So our identity shifts, but ultimately it lands somewhere in that direction. And we can find that, then we can make peace with all the things that we've had to let go of, right? We can make peace with even others not understanding us. We can turn that also into a form of service, right? Having compassion for them for not understanding us as we've gone through our changes. That can also be a form of service, right? And then from there, we can, of course, still engage in the practical things like finding community amongst people that are going through some sort of transformation like this. That's what we are doing here today. That can help. We can also, rather than expecting other people to meet us where we're at because we have changed, We can recognize if we are the awakened ones, if we are so enlightened and evolved, well, then we should be able to be flexible and meet others where they're at. If they've never changed, that's okay. So finding some sort of common thread, right? That exists between us and the people that maybe we used to be able to relate with, but now it's a little difficult. There's still some common threads that we can connect with them on, and I think we should lean into those threads and meet them there. So no matter how far out your process has been, no matter what sort of mystical experiences you've had, still, when you go outside, you experience the same weather as the person who has no sense of spirituality, and you can talk to them about the weather. You totally can. You can meet them there. You're still going to be affected by the same politics as your neighbor. You can talk about politics, right? You get what I mean? There's common threads that we can still actually engage with people in. And it's not about the weather. It's not about the politics. It's about the human connection. And so this can help us with integration as well. Sometimes we get this idea, this arrogance, and I've felt this as well, this arrogance that comes up, which says, I'm so different from everybody else. I'm so different. I'm either a victim because nobody gets me, or I'm either so special because nobody gets me. And it's arrogant, and it actually causes a person to alienate themselves from other people who probably would still like to connect with you. But if you think you're special or different, well, then it make it rather hard. So acknowledging that, yes, you may have gone through a very significant awakening process for sure, but still there's some mundane human aspects of you that remain, and you should honor them and lean into them. I think that's one of the most effective ways to overcome this idea that I've changed so much, nobody gets me, I don't know what to do, I don't know how to talk to people anymore, or I don't want to talk to people about those normal, mundane, boring things. I think we should be a little bit more flexible. Otherwise, like I said, we become those grumpy people that end up being very lonely because they're blaming everybody else for being however they are. And I don't think that's too healthy, right? We don't want to be isolated or alienate ourselves in that way. And we can remember, of course, many great mystics, many great spiritual masters related with, mundane worldly people, right? Jesus hung out with tax collectors, the Buddha, worked with murderers, right? All sorts of people, and they became enlightened, right? So all of this is available to us too. We can relate with all of these different people following their lead in this way. And so that's a little bit of what I've got to share about integrating identity changes. I'm looking forward to hearing what others have to share. Maybe you've got your own experiences with this. Maybe you've got some ideas about how your integration process is going that you'd like to share with others. Maybe you've got some things to grieve about. We can grieve together as well if you want to express some uncomfortable emotions too. We're here to hold space for that as well, because we're all going through it to some degree or another. So before I open the floor up, I want to thank you all once again for tuning in. I see lots going on in the chat that I'll check out in a second, but I want to remind you to visit kundaliniawareness.org. We've got a directory of licensed mental health professionals with Kundalini awakening experience. They're there to support you if you happen to be within their locality. We've also got a collection of stories of Kundalini awakening process, all very unique stories, beautifully written, very exciting. Check the stories out. Thank you to all those that submitted a story. If you'd like to submit yours, please go ahead. We'd love to share it. We're putting together a collection of stories just to raise awareness about this process. We've also got lots of resources there. We've got peer support groups. It's all free, right? We're just doing this to raise awareness about the most far out thing that has ever been, Kundalini awakening. That's what I think. So with that said, I'm going to invite others to jump on the call and share. You can type in the chat, but I'm going to prioritize those on the call today. Maybe you've got something to share. So let's go over here to Samia and see what Samia has to share.
Good evening, all. How you doing,
Samia?
Brent?
Good.
I appreciate the conversation. It's been very, very rough lately, I'm sure for everybody, but for me, especially since I moved, I've noticed it's very hard to find work. And that's never been an issue for me before my awakening. I could have 2, 3 jobs, and now it's just challenging to keep a job or find work that aligns with me. It's just, I used to be able, I guess, muscle through it or use more of the masculine energy, I guess, to work through anything. And that just doesn't apply anymore. And I'm at a really lost state of that's part of myself. I can work, I do this, that, and now it's very, very challenging. So just any suggestions from anybody, either if like maybe work from home or just some ways and means to pay my bills while I'm going through this process, until I get to, the next state where I can either help others or do healing work. But in the midst, I mean, I've never experienced this before. And I'm 52. So it's like, it's really, really wild to me. Um, Integrating my integration period was rough as well, but I noticed like movement and a lot of different types of meditation, whether it's walking meditations or movement meditations or yoga nidra, aided me a great deal in integrating and being in nature. Absolutely. But this job thing and with my finances, it just turned my life upside down. I've been thankful enough to have friends where I moved to because I moved out of state where they can support me, but it's just very challenging. And I went through a lot of purging the last 3 weeks because of this as well, because of finances and everything up. I purged from stuff from my childhood. Like I was purging and crying, and I think I couldn't cry no more, and I cried more, and I'm like, okay. And then I sat in it a little too long. I was getting depressed, and I had to crawl my way out of it. And so I noticed that, the purging is okay, but I just really can't sit in it too long, because it could take you to some dark places as well. The negative talk in my head was really, really bad. I've never experienced it like I have, but it's just real stuff going on with finances and stuff. I mean, granted. So I gave myself some grace with that, and but I'm open to any suggestions or readings or any way how to go through this and be able to work and function at a job to pay your bills. So any suggestions, and thanks for letting me share.
Oh, thank you, Samia. Thank you for sharing. I don't think your challenges, I don't think you're the only one faced with those challenges. So I appreciate you opening up for all those that might be there. I've been there as well myself. Um, I'm open to see if any others have some things to share. I can share a little bit about how I sort of made sense of that sort of thing. So like you were sharing, Samia, you recognize that, there's some direction of service, some healing, some work that you're being called to do. So I would make this deal with God. I'd say, look, you want me to serve and help? Well, then make it easy for me. I'm here, use me. And I would always hear back, of course, just relax and trust. But in that trust, there's like, you have to go into the unknown and just not know what's going to happen. And what I found is I was always held in some way, always held in some way. Miracles would happen, things like this. Um, that's the way that I've sort of handled. I guess gave up my life to God, and I said, look, I'm tired of trying to do your work and also take care of myself in this weird way. Just I'll do your work, but take care of me too. And God said, of course, of course, we'll take care of you. Um, but also you mentioned, the 3 weeks of purging associated with this theme. So often we purge, say on this theme, survival fears, core primal things to do with shelter and food and safety, right? All to do with money, right? Muladhara, mula, money, all related. Take some time for the nervous system to settle into this newfound shifts. And sometimes, like, especially if it's been 2 to 3 weeks of purging, give it a little bit of time for the nervous system to settle in. And then what I found is that then life begins to also mirror back to you the shifts that you've made. So I hope that that unfolds for you. We also don't want to overly spiritualize serious matters like, work and career and safety. So I see others are asking in the chat, what kind of work you're wanting to do. Maybe somebody's down your way and there's some interesting opportunities out there. You never know. You never know. I see lots of others relating to you in the chat as well, Samia. So thank you so much. Thank you. Let's see what Dre has to share here.
Hey, I just wanted to offer I guess maybe my perspective or a little bit of how I handled that. Because I definitely experienced a huge disconnect with the work I was doing. And I was trying so hard to find a new job and something that would align. And I mean, it is so hard because you have to pay the bills. And I think what ended up really serving me um, at the time, and I'm kind of still working through that process, is when I found a community where I could um, really both learn how to like do embodiment work my nervous system, and which is kind of what Brian was saying. And even I started doing like psychic development work because I have found that the type of service that I want to do is, I guess, in that line. Um, I found that I was starting to fulfill this yearning to to do this type of work while also, keeping my day job. And it kind of does feel like you're living a double life. And I think that's at least where we're at in society. It's sort of just where we're at the moment because society hasn't fully reached this point fully yet. But I would just, this is not me telling you what to do. It's just more, I found that if I found an outlet to really continue to nurture the spiritual side and fulfill that yearning for that growth and that level of service in other ways, and I could just have a job that helps me pay the bills, really things like settle down eventually. And I'm starting to see a clearer path now, of change along the way, and not trying to stay too focused on the future and what I want. But yeah, I just finding a community where you can still fulfill that need within you. And it's okay also to have a job that's just going to support you, financially, and isn't necessarily having to check all those boxes right now, is my perspective, and just something that helped me. I
Right
hope
on.
that resonates.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dre. For sure. And for some, keeping the healing work separate from, needing it to pay the bills can be can be ideal for the work, and to also keep a person you know, feeling like showing up to do that work. Uh I, I was working as a dog photographer, photographing dogs, puppies, litters of puppies. People would bring me like litters of like 10 puppies. It was a dream job, but it was a job. And eventually I started to say, like, I don't want to do this anymore. And I can imagine that could totally happen if you're, doing service healing work solely to pay the bills as well. You might start to compromise on your integrity, on your quality, on your values. Not everybody, but it could totally happen. And so I see your perspective, and I appreciate that, Dre. Thank you. Yeah, Kat's sharing here in the chat too. Very helpful insight, Dre. I've been having a similar struggle with my job lately. Yeah. Yeah, we're not alone here. Phoebe's sharing here to consider working with a Lakshmi mantra for a time, setting your intentions clearly. I've found it very supportive. Yes, me too. Om Gam Shri Mahalakshmiye Namaha. Lakshmi, um, the manifestation of Shakti, the Divine Mother, the goddess of abundance, prosperity. I've shared this before, but I think it's appropriate to share again. On retreat, I was in a sort of meditative space where I could invoke any deity just by their name. They would show up in a sort of visionary state for me. And so eventually I evoked Lakshmi, and I said, Lakshmi, show me how to be truly abundant. And Lakshmi was sitting in front of me, massive, seated in this lotus, facing me. And I was sitting cross-legged, and I began to float up, and I moved into Lakshmi, and I turned around, and so I sat down on Lakshmi's lap, both of us facing forward. And then I kept going down, not stopping at her lap, I actually merged into Lakshmi completely, and I became Lakshmi. And I had my hands out like this, and I just heard the word give, give. So I understood that to mean, of course, the way to be truly abundant is to give. That was Lakshmi's message for me. I thought she was going to tell me the lottery or something. Instead, she told me the complete opposite, but it made sense. And I mean, I give as much as I can. It's working out so far, seems. So hopefully that can be meaningful for others as well. But of course, easier said than done when you have bills to pay and, you know, things like that. I understand. Shiv says, make us rich. Well, you can try the Lakshmi mantra, see how that goes. Teresa says, shares here, Nom Myoho Renge Kyo. I have that on one of my playlists. I liked it a lot. I don't even know what that mantra means. Maybe Teresa, you can let us know what that one means. The Japanese words chanted within all forms of Nichiren Buddhism. In English, they mean devotion to the mystic law of the Lotus Sutra or glory to the Dharma of the Lotus Sutra. Oh, thank you so much for sharing that, Teresa. That's Nom Myoho Renge Kyo. Love it. And it shares here, I'm in the midst of seeing my shadow play out full force, pure narcissism. It is good to see, but next is for me to actually making different choices, the actual identity shift. Right, right. Yeah, so seeing is often the first step, you know, becoming aware, shining light on it. Definitely, there are some changes that we can make, but also just bringing mindful awareness to any of these adverse effects, whether it's subtle attachments or some sort of overt manifestation of something like narcissism, right? Awareness can be a very, very powerful tool. Sounds like you've got that going on. Molly's sharing here that they're really struggling and would appreciate prayers and healing vibes. Lots of others in the community offering their support to Molly. Those listening in the archive, you can also offer your support to Molly. It travels across time and space. Serpent Power is sharing some great insight here. From my personal experience, we should not make major shifts in our life while Kundalini is very active and we feel unstable. Once we have done the integration, we can start to implement the changes. I think that's brilliant advice, brilliant insight. I recently, last week, was at a holotropic breathwork workshop. Really far out, really profound. Briefly, holotropic breathwork was developed by Stanislav Grof. Transpersonal Psychology, Spiritual Emergency, great books. His wife, former wife, Christina Grof, had a Kundalini awakening during childbirth. So they've done a lot of work in this area, and they developed holotropic breathwork. Very powerful, not for everybody, especially if you're in the midst of some very intense awakening, but can be very powerful if you're feeling stable and have the ability to manage a sort of far out experience like that. But anyway, I did this workshop, had a cool experience, altered state of consciousness. It was interesting, but at the end, the facilitator said that, you know, when we do a workshop like this, it's very intense. So give it at least a month before you quit your job, move to another country, or get a divorce. Give it some time. Like, don't, you know, right after the workshop, quit your job, get a divorce, and get on a plane to go live somewhere else. That's a little, you know, maybe premature. But like Serpent Power is saying here, you know, once we've done that integration in the nervous system, once we've processed, then we can, you know, take stock and make healthy, wise decisions based on the changes that we've made as a result of our work. So that's great insight there. Great insight there. Shiv's asking, has anyone in here faced severe fatigue and exhaustion? I'm here suffering from it from over a year, and now I'm at the point where I'll have to see a healer. Yeah, definitely been there myself. The problem is there can be so many reasons that we feel fatigued. So many reasons. Spiritual, of course, but even without the whole spirituality factor, can make it very difficult to discern. Within the spiritual context, we can acknowledge that this is quite a taxing process on our nervous system. And so sometimes we need to rest. We need to just rest and work with that. When I faced it, a lot of the themes that came up for me were surrendering my idea of control, surrendering fear of what might happen if I just rested and gave my body what it needed, right? There's a lot of fear around that, and I had to just, rest and see what happened. And at least for me, things, generally speaking, worked out. But of course, there's so many other things we can consider: diet, supplements, just sleep patterns, sleep hygiene, all these types of things. Lots of people sharing some insight here. Thank you all so much for offering your support to Shiv. BT's shares here. Any info about super tight, filled up? Seems like it. Throat and head. Yeah, so sometimes we get this sort of pressure as prana, as life force, as this Kundalini moves into those spaces. You can practice grounding, which means walking outside barefoot, hugging trees, getting into the body, bringing some of your awareness and attention into the body. This can help. Putting your tongue up to the roof of your mouth, closing the energetic channel between the top of your head and the bottom part of your body. This can help as well. Movement, eating well, these things can help. Also, avoiding any meditations which may have to do with the areas where you're feeling this pressure. So some people are doing these intense third eye meditations, and then they're wondering why their forehead and their head constantly feels like there's pressure. It's because of those meditations. So these things we can also keep in mind. I like to say, if you're feeling a lot of pressure in the head, see if you can bring attention to the feet. Give your feet as much spiritual attention as you would the top of the head, the crown chakra, the 1,000-petal lotus. You can also pay attention to the feet. Also a very spiritual, sacred part of the body. The entire body is equally sacred and spiritual, right? I hope that can help, but head pressure is also very common, very common. See here, Traveling Little Fish says, God bless us all. We all seem to be at the coalface of a collective blockage. Radical forgiveness seems to be where I'm at the moment. Morning routine is a bliss fet, yet these shadow thoughts come in and rock me. Everything seems so much more sensitive now. Practice has more power, and yet shadow blockages are front and center. Sounds very intense, but it sounds like you're doing some really powerful work. Thank you so much for sharing, Traveling Little Fish. Hey, Kat.
Hi, Brent. Hi, guys. Figured I'd share. Firstly, I wanted to thank you, Brent, for doing this topic tonight and taking our lines and recommendations into consideration. One of the first big shifts for me in my awakening process was kind of my sense of self. And I didn't know I had awakened my Kundalini, and it took about 6 months for me to figure out what was going on. But one of the first things that happened was I just kind of looked around and I was like, didn't like my job, didn't like my partner, I didn't like anything about my life, but on paper it was so ideal. And I was like, but this isn't what I want. But it had the flair of kind of my whole life. I had been like a codependent people pleaser. So not only did I have a awakening, shifting my sense of identity, my original sense of identity was already so skewed and dependent on, my family, my friends, my job, what's expected of me. So it has been a really tricky part of my process. I just hit the 1-year mark in May, figured out what was going in October. And, I think all those masks that we wear are for the sake of fitting in, community, all that good sacral chakra stuff. But so yeah, it's been one of the trickier parts of my process. Um, just kind of, rediscovering myself and then some, since I'm really digging deep at this point, just based on the way I was raised and nature, nurture, all that good stuff. So just figured I'd share and wanted to thank you for doing this topic because it did seem like it's been relevant to a lot of us over the course of the last several weeks, on our late night hangs. So just wanted to share.
And thanks, Kat. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. And I think others can relate with you as well. So thank you for suggesting this topic. So Kat suggested this topic. So can thank her if you're getting some value out of our conversation today. If you have a topic to suggest, you can send me a line. Ideally, if you keep it short and brief and consider a topic that is, of course, relevant to you, but also general enough that others can benefit from as well. That's best. If you just send me a couple lines, I can see if I can put something together. Yeah. Okay. Great. Thank you so much, Kat.
Thanks, Brian.
Okay, let's go over here to Teresa.
Yeah, thank you, Brent. Yeah, so I like this topic because I'm currently going through that. But it's definitely not the first time, and I find it interesting. Kind of been over the last week, been kind of like, just doing a lot of emotional processing. And I know that I'm getting rid of a bunch of stuff, right? And changing into something new. And I'm excited about it, but at the same time, it's like it scares the hell out of you. And then I look back and I go, well, I did it this time and I did it this other time. And this time really was actually the hardest time. So this really isn't that hard, So it's like trying to keep your head above water while you keep bobbing under the water with all of it. So yeah, I find it interesting that it seems to happen in levels. Like I guess kind of like peeling back the onion. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, thanks so much for sharing, Teresa. That reminds me, I was going to actually use the onion analogy and mention Shrek because we are like onions, right? And layers and layers to our identity. Um, Nothing but layers, no center, right? No self actually there.
Most
Yeah.
definitely, all layers. I
Yeah.
found that one of the things that helps me, um, I guess, integrate the changes and kind of make it easier for the changes. I guess you could say nothing's going to be easy, right? Because if it was easy, everybody would have done it, right? But makes it a little bit more tolerable, I guess is the correct word. I find being physically active, whatever physically active is. So, I mean, I'm in my mid 50s, so I'm not out. I mean, there are people my age out running marathons, but it's definitely not me. But I can get up and I can go walking, right? Or I can do a little bit of calisthenics at home or a little bit of yoga and some stretching. So, and I find that if I make sure that I'm at least a little bit physically active every day, it seems to make the process easier over the long term. So, just a little suggestion.
Yeah, fantastic. Once again, honoring the body, right? Embodiment in the body for sure. That's really great, great insight. And I love your idea there of looking back at the past and saying, hey, well, I succeeded this one time, and that other time it worked out, and the other time it worked out. Probably going to work out this time too. So one thing that I share with people is keep a journal of every time you've had some form of a win, some form of evidence that this is working out for you. Small things, big things, synchronicities, things working out in weird ways, dreams you've had that seem to have suggested that you're on the right path. Anything you can think of, you have to develop a huge body of evidence that you are supported through this process, right? So it's a very, very powerful tool. Just, like Teresa was saying, looking back at the past and saying, hey, worked out before. I'm going to be okay. Thanks so much, Teresa. Lots of value there. Thank you. Deborah is sharing here. One thing that I've encountered are mental health therapists that do not understand these experiences. Too often, I've encountered a lot of bias and feeling that the therapist was trying to tell me it was a pathological experience. Similarly, when I found what I thought was a spiritual community, I have too often felt estrangement and even shunning because of wanting to share my experiences in hopes to connect further with other people. This has happened a few times in my life, most recently in a yoga community. Trust and safety were deeply betrayed. I don't feel there is a path to recovery. So I continue on my own path. But truthfully, it's very depressing, and it makes you wonder if the human condition can even be improved to a point where we will all live in peace. It sounds like quite a challenge, especially with the therapist. You build rapport, you give them money, you spend time, you open up about your past, and they're there with you. It feels right. And then you share with them about some sort of spiritual experience, and they don't know what to do with it. And they call it some sort of pathology. Very unfortunate. Yeah. Then that can happen again in a community, spiritual community, yoga community. What I found within, like, say, the mental health field, even the yoga and meditation field, there's different levels and layers. On the surface level, people aren't ready to really go as deep as some of us have gone. And what's interesting is that if they haven't been there, I find I don't know how capable anybody is of really holding space and understanding what we have to share without causing their own doubt, judgments, and bias to somehow creep in, right? Because if we're talking about Kundalini, talking about something like that, it always has to include the listener as well. Because if we're saying this happened to me and this is possible, the listener then has to have a thought going in their head going, that must be possible for me too. I don't think it's possible. So therefore that person who's talking about it is probably crazy or something wrong with them. And I mean, that's something I've encountered as well myself, also in some spiritual communities. And that's why I put together KundaliniAwareness.org, right? So we can work to resolve this, because there are great therapists out there who do have these type of experiences. You know, they are able to speak from a place where they can relate and validate authentically. So later this week, I'll be interviewing Emma Bragdon. She has done a lot of work in this space as a counselor, as an author. She wrote some books on how to support people going through spiritual emergencies for those in positions like therapists, counselors, etc. So we'll unpack this a little bit in our interview, and I hope you all will get some value out of it. Emma Bragdon, she's done a lot of great work in this space. She also offers training courses for other therapists so that they can better understand spirituality as well. IMHU, Integrative Mental Health University, that's her platform. So you can check out that sort of thing and look forward to our conversation. Yeah, you're not alone, Deborah. You're not alone there. The Jackal asks, any advice on integrating back into friends who are quite mainstream church-oriented, as in those who frown on this type of thing? It's just hard for me when I know it's real and I have knowledge on it now, but they're ignorant to it. And I don't know, it's just hard to find a middle ground. Yeah, I understand. I understand. So if they're church folk, you can remember, like I was sharing earlier, the story of Jesus, right? He hung out with prostitutes, tax collectors, hung out with everybody, right? We don't have to be like Jesus. We don't have to like say that we're the Son of God and stuff, but we can be in their company, right? And we can meet them where they're at. But we can also know that the more evolved we go on the path, the more integrated and mature we become, we develop this tact and this skill of being able to meet people where they're at. Sometimes people don't need to hear about Kundalini. They just need to hear some sort of basic compliment. How was your weekend? That's what they need. They don't need to hear about Kundalini. They just need to hear that somebody cares about them. So the more that we develop and open our heart and develop our intuition, we can be very, very skillful in recognizing what people actually need to hear from us, right? And so, like you're sharing here, people can't really understand about all this far out stuff, right? They frown on it. Yeah, maybe they don't need to acknowledge it. Same with the Dalai Lama. The Dalai Lama is very, very advanced, but he doesn't speak the most wisest thing he's ever come to understand. He knows his audience and he shares what's relevant, right? Practice compassion, right? Practice patience, right speech, he just meets people where they're at, right? So in the same way, we can understand this about ourselves as well. I had the same sort of question myself, how am I supposed to talk to other people about my forward experiences? I recognize I wasn't really supposed to talk to everybody about it. If you want to, you can do what I've done, use the internet, make a platform and attract the right people that you can go really deep with. That's one thing you could do. I recognize also Amma, the hugging saint, Amma. I recognize her as being very advanced. And I heard she was giving a talk in Toronto. So I thought, oh, I'll go to see her talk. Maybe she's going to talk about something like, Kundalini, or maybe she's going to break down the different levels of samadhi, different levels of meditative absorption. These are the things that I'm interested in. Hopefully she'll be able to speak to those things. Well, I went to go see her in Toronto and she wasn't saying anything about Kundalini or meditation. She wasn't saying anything like that. She was just telling the people, hey, love one another, be present, be kind, serve, love God. That's what we need on the planet right now. I was a little disappointed, but that's when I recognized, oh, this lady is so wise. She's able to calibrate her message depending on who's listening. So that's a skill that we can also develop as well. We can calibrate our message depending on who's listening, right? It's difficult, but I think the burden falls on us rather than falling on the people in our community to fully understand us. I think the burden falls on us to adapt to fit in with them, right? Because we're the ones who are awake and evolved and advanced and enlightened, right? So I think we have to do a bit of the heavy lifting in some respects. Now, of course, this can be argued, especially if there's a community that's, presenting themselves as being super open and spiritual, right? For sure. A therapist presenting themselves as being open and unconditionally loving and non-judgmental, and then they go and they turn on you and they judge you. I can understand that's a different situation, but this is just part of the path that we have to, navigate. It's a tricky, treacherous journey for sure. Let's go over here to Deborah.
I just want to second the idea of, I guess the term of meeting someone where they are. Sometimes I feel like, I guess from my own past experiences, that was kind of a perception like, gosh, I'm so advanced and I've seen these things, but it really wasn't that. It was more like, I really want to share. I really want to open up. And every once in a while, because of other things, it seemed as though I guess it was a good thing to question my ego, but it's always been just this super enthusiastic energy of like, can we lift each other up? And so over time, I've really come to embrace, and I think I just get really good at it of like, we don't have to go deep. Just showing some care for someone is beauty. It's holy. It's sacred. And so, yeah, I just wanted to kind of just throw that in there because some of this gets really heavy, and especially the negative experiences can be devastating. But sometimes it really does come down to something as simple as just saying, "Hey, how are you? Can we hang out? I'm here to listen, and I'm glad that I know you."
Oh, that's beautiful. Yeah. There's something really sweet in what you just shared there. I'm glad that I know you. I think of course, the place from where you're speaking from, Deborah, for sure, but just the wording of that, it's almost like we don't hear that. And it's so, yeah, that's really sweet. Yeah. And I'm happy that you can relate and expand on that point. You know, it's just the simple, ordinary things, very sacred, very sacred. Yeah, beautiful. Oh, you're so welcome, the Jackal. It was a great question and theme. Nicole's sharing here. I have 4 adult daughters who are all on a spiritual awakening path. This caused great conflict within my family unit, division, judgment, etc. I lack any resolve to help them understand my journey. Any advice would be greatly appreciated. Yeah, that sounds really difficult, like we were sharing, you know. One thing I can share, you know, is it's difficult for even the individual themselves to understand their journey, right? That takes a lot of time to process what we've gone through. So expecting someone else to be as invested, to care as much, to make sense of it, to understand it, I think that's a lot as well. Another paradigm or approach that we can use is that our spirituality is like our sexuality in that it's meant to be personal, private, sacred, shared with only a few people, right? Very select few people, right? For some reason, I understand I'm the same way. I mean, I'm speaking about it publicly here, but for some reason, we get this idea that our spirituality should be like the most important thing that we tell everybody about. But says who? Says who? Why can't we look at it as if it was something sacred and very personal, like our sexuality, right? So it's another way of looking at it. It's another way to see it, right? Keeping it close, near, dear to our heart, treat it with great respect and care, knowing that like our sexuality, if we open up to people about it, it could be, in a sense, maybe weaponized against us. You know, people can come up with all sorts of judgments against us, ideas about us, the same way they use our spirituality, you know, in that way, if we open up to the wrong people at the wrong times. Just another way to look at it, right? I'm not trying to say, you know, victim blame you if you happen to have expressed about your spirituality and got burned, but just another paradigm, right? Consider that, you know, maybe it's something to keep private and personal. See how that works for you. Let's go over here to Noemi.
Hello.
Hey.
I just wanted to read a card from this shamanic animal medicine deck that I have.
Please.
That I pulled for tonight. It's called Claim Your Power, and it's the tiger. I'll show a picture in a minute. Okay. Anyone face to face with a tiger instantly shifts into a state of respect for her prolific power. Tiger summons you to connect with your greatest power. To overcome yourself, to overcome your doubts, fears, insecurities, and illusions of the ego, and to use boundaries. While many of the animals in the apothecary deck asks you to be accepting of your emotions, when this card comes up, it means enough is enough. Tiger does not appear now with the feminine energy of allowing. This is the masculine energy of taking action and creating what you want. It is time to care more about the end goal than the heavy emotions you are currently feeling. The action called for here is snap out of the illusion and get your thoughts in gear. When you change your thoughts of the world around you changes. When you change your thoughts of the world around you changes. Get in control of your thoughts and transform the story you tell yourself. You are not your feelings, so stop mistaking them for your identity. Shift perspective, conquer your emotions, and carve the life you desire. You can no longer submit to the identities and definitions that you once projected on yourself and others. It's time to move forward and initiate your power. When you stand in your greatness like a tiger, you have nothing to prove, for you just are. True power is not dictated or enforced. It is an energy that magnetizes others to want to help you in your cause. Once someone has to prove and display their strength, they've already lost it. Tiger's medicine says, stop playing the victim of circumstance. Your power is even greater than Tiger's. Yet you wallow in smallness and self-pity. How strange it is that one with so much power is so blinded by it. You feel imprisoned by your circumstances, yet the only prison is the story you painted over your circumstances. Tiger's medicine is to wake up, get real, change your story, change your life, claim your power. It's very intense, but I think it's really fitting. I was kind of scared to talk about my personal experience, but since I'm talking already, something that I've learned about just my life and what I'm experiencing in my life now is that I can't move forward and kind of step into the person I want to be if I'm thinking about who I used to be and talking about who I used to be and talking about what I don't want to be. And because I'm talking about it and I'm thinking about it all the time, and it's like keeping me in that loop of being who I used to be when I really don't want to be that anymore. So what I've learned is, instead of focusing on, you know, what I don't want to be, why am I not focusing on what I do want to be? Because I feel like I'm in like recreation mode in my life, where I've like let go and like released so many things in my body and in my heart, that there's so much room for me to create myself now in any way I want. And that is it really overwhelming and scary, but it's also really exciting because it's like now I can recreate myself in any way I want. You know, like I let myself fall apart for these past few years. And honestly, this past year, I've let myself fall apart while having a job full time and dealing with my life. And I'm here kicking, and I'm sure everybody else, you know, can resonate with that, you know, working, having responsibilities, family, all this stuff. But it's like you're here now and you're alive. And I feel like that's a lot to be grateful for. And also like practicing gratitude. There's always something, there's always something to embrace. There's always something to love. And if your circumstances are so terrible, but you can talk, you can shower, you can make food, you can walk, you have feet. It's just simple things like that that I feel like we all take for granted. I mean, I take that shit for granted. Like I'm talking right now, I'm able to express myself to a group of people that are probably pretty cool. Like that's very big, I feel like. Uh, so yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Noemi. Some great wisdom there. Thanks for sharing the card. The tiger reminds me of Durga, the Rise of the Tiger. I'm sure that spoke to some others out there. You said something really great. It was like, there's so much space within me that I can use to create, you know. Oh,
Can you
thanks for
see
sharing
that?
the card there. Yeah, let me try and zoom in.
And this is my favorite animal too. So that's cool that I
Nice.
pulled it.
Nice.
Yeah.
Amazing. Thank you. Okay. Yeah, and thanks for the reminder as well about gratitude. Gratitude, the easiest way to cultivate a positive emotional state. Gratitude for anything and everything. Awesome. Okay. So we'll go over here to Mark and then we'll begin to wrap it up here. Hey, Mark.
Hey, thanks, Brent. I forgot exactly what you shared at the beginning, but I was just watching on the TV first and I wasn't tuned in. You were talking about everything rising to the crown and the head, and personality feeling kind of different, voice feeling different. Just I think it was the title of the group. But I shared in the last Q&A that Kundalini's been going into my face. Like first it was more recently, it was my heart and then my arms. So it was my arms for a little bit, then my throat, and then my face, like a lot. The face was just like what's happening just nonstop for a while. But yeah, it's interesting because certain things that are coming up, like my thoughts, there's a space between my attachment to the thoughts and the reaction isn't there. Like the reaction isn't there with certain things going on in my life where it normally would be. And it's really cool. Like it's nice. but it's also it's just different, you know. I told someone it felt kind of like a filter of my identity, or like, I don't know. It felt like I was listening to my past self, like whatever is coming to mind. It's like, okay, well, I'm listening to my past self again, like that. I'm not even sure.
Right.
So this is also advice for everybody here, is that I'm just really patient with this process. There's really no need to rush any of it. And I think somebody actually was talking about, like, if there is tension in your third eye area or something, I've backed away from certain crystals, definitely. I mean, I've just been really sensitive to them for myself, but overall they've been really helpful. But yeah, that's it's been strange to navigate who I am and what I want now, because when I was younger, I mean, I was put on medication anyway, so there's a part of me that's like, I am more like, I'm more who I was like ever in my life. Like, I was put on medication when I was like 7 or something. So I didn't even get this far, I guess, which sucks, but yeah, it feels really great. I just don't know what to do with it yet. Sometimes I think of that song that's like, now that we found love, what are we gonna do with it? That song. So I mean, there's definitely good stuff going on. Just not sure yet, because every time I would think about making a channel or sharing more, then I would ascend more. Or, I would want to socialize with people, but then I would ascend more. So I mean, I would kind of outgrow that situation like the next week, So yeah, I'm hoping that once, I guess this is going more to the top of the head, maybe things will kind of stabilize more. And I think they are. I think the heart getting more involved was a big deal. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Right on, Mark. Thanks for sharing. Thanks for sharing. Yeah. I think there's a key word in what you shared there, which was yet. Don't know where this is going yet. What's going to happen? We're not sure yet, but it's going to work out. It's one thing to consider. I like to put it this way: the universe, Shakti, God, Kundalini is very efficient. It doesn't put so much energy into us for no reason. It's going to work out. It's not in vain. We just have to stay with it and see what happens. But that's a great share. Very exciting. Very exciting. Yeah, keep dropping by and sharing some updates on how all of that unfolds for you. Thanks so much, Mark. I appreciate everybody for joining tonight and sharing with us, or even just listening. Appreciate you all so, so much. KundaliniAwareness.org. Check it out, as I said. For those that offer a donation, I really, really appreciate you. It allows me to do this for free. It goes a long, long way for me. So thank you so much. If you have a bit of change lying around and you feel called, the donation link is there, brentspirit.com/donate. Helps a lot. I've got a course out, Grounded, Spiritual Emergence and Integration. We cover a lot of the things that we've touched upon today in our meeting, integration, integrating our shifts or after our spiritual emergence into the world, aligning ourselves with our purpose, making sense of how to relate with other people after going through this process, but also understanding why others don't understand. Also, I looked a little bit at the historical context around why the Western scientific medical paradigm isn't open to these ideas. So we looked at that sort of thing as well in the course, among other things. Check it out. If you're curious, you can visit the website there, brentspirit.com/grounded. You can read the curriculum and see if there's some things that jump out at you. If you'd like to meet with me one-on-one, I've got some openings this month. You can check out my website to find out more. Much love, everybody. Much love. Get some sleep. Get some sleep. Take care. Much love. Much love.